Thank you for joining us today for Look Before You Speak, and today we have a real treat. The Paxson murals at the courthouse in Missoula have been reinstalled this year, and they've been in storage for a little over 2 years, almost 3 years. That relates to the fact that there was some work done on the courthouse, but it also provided an opportunity to reposition some of the work, include some new work, improve the presentation, reframe, and improve the lighting for the works. The Paxson murals were done and installed in the courthouse in 1914. This mural here is about local Missoula history. That's the signing of the Hellgate Treaty with Governor Stevens. In 1912, the county commissioners began to commission artists do some murals that are in the courthouse. And some of those murals in the rotunda are by artists unknown. But the Women's Club of Missoula stood up and really wanted to have a local artist represented and a local artist telling local stories reflected in the courthouse. So with that prompting, the county commissioners agreed to hire Edgar Paxson, and it took him roughly 2 years to complete, almost 3 years to complete the murals. The murals were installed in 1914 to a great deal of fanfare. Those of you that go and see the murals today, you'll see that the murals have been slightly repositioned. And there's a reason for that, and part of it's safety and protection of the murals. There were 2 murals in particular, including the portrait we just looked at of Governor Stevens, that were in a hallway, and they were in a position in such a way that people were leaning up against them, like waiting to get through a doorway. And with the value of the paintings increasing and with the investment that the county has made in the murals, they're really a community treasure. So it was a great deal of effort and investment to improve the experience, protect the paintings, and I think the county commissioners and everyone that's worked on this conservation project should be applauded. Edgar Paxson, in developing the stories that were going to go into the courthouse, had some stories that were general, more metaphors, and some that were very, very specific. For example, the signing of the Hellgate Treaty. But this mural in the corner just relates to the settlement of the West and the evolution of and a homage to cowboys and cattle, raising cattle on the plains. On the other side of the window is kind of the flip side of that story, and that is an homage to the people who have always been here, American Indians, and the key place that harvesting buffalo and Missoula being on the trade highway from the plains of eastern Montana, positioned as a real trade center to indigenous cultures. I think it's interesting as you look on both sides of that window. It's important to note that in this conservation effort, that all of the window has been covered with UV protection, and the murals are protected from ultraviolet light from outside. As we look around at the other paintings, we can see someone who's just really passionate about Montana art history. And this painting right here relates to the Lewis and Clark expedition. And as you can see in the lower right-hand side, there's Charbonneau and Sakakawea. And this is William Clark and Patrick Gass, and they're meeting with the Nez Perce, or the Nimipu, here. And this is also their guide, the old Toby, who is Shoshone, and he's translating for Clark. anyway, they're trying to negotiate their way through Lolo Pass. And, Paxson's a little bit romantic about this. He's kind of, this is quite a few years later, and 40, 50 years later. And so some of this is not all that accurate, but he's really attempting to be faithful to history and include all the characters that were actually there from the research that he was able to do at the time. When we look at this painting, you look at the lighting and the framing, and it's just really a much better experience for us today to go in and enjoy this and look at this. Another one of the large murals that Paxson created and focused on, and this relates to a more tragic story related to Missoula, and that's the removal of the Salish from the Bitterroot. And the removal, really, it doesn't show any federal troops here, but there were federal troops involved who escorted the Salish away from their homeland in the Bitterroot and up to the Flathead Reservation. This has all of the elders and characters here in the front row. Paxson attempted to be faithful to history, but again, he's showing this in a much more romantic way than probably the tragedy that it actually was. And the Salish came through downtown Missoula when and it took them 2 days to get up to the Flathead Reservation. And there was a lot of crying and wailing on the way, and none of that is depicted. I think it's really interesting that Paxson arrived here in Montana. He was born and raised in New York, and he arrived here in Montana less than 1 year after the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876, 77, in there somewhere. And he was passionate about researching history, being a storyteller, a narrative storyteller. And so, we think of these paintings as probably really, really old, but 1914 is kind of right before the modern era and the Industrial Revolution takes off. And so he's trying to preserve some of these stories. And we have to remember that Edgar Paxson was part of the more dominant culture. And, he was part of the white culture. And but I'm thankful that he reflected this story. It's really an important story. Another large painting and story that Paxson decided to depict is the arrival of Father Ravalli and the Jesuits in the Bitterroot Valley as spiritual advisors, leaders, and teachers. I think the Salish invited the black robes and wanted the black robes. They were very curious about the black robes. And the founding of the St. Mary's Mission around Stevensville. And I think there was 4 black robes that actually came out with Father Ravalli. And that's the story that's depicted here. Another large painting is another work that relates to the Lewis and Clark expedition, and that is the crossing of the Clark Fork River. And right smack dab in the center of this painting is Patrick Gass, who was on the expedition. And this painting is pretty interesting. Charbonneau is in the lower right, packing, and what they're doing here is preparing rafts out of wood, and it took them, I guess, about 4 to 6 hours to prepare the rafts out of logs. And as we notice downstream, the Indians are riding their horses across without the rafts, crossing back and forth. but the Corps of Discovery is getting all their supplies onto the rafts and crossing the river. As we look around the rotunda at the courthouse, it's easy to think back to 1914, but this installation is quite different, and our experience of the work is quite different. Today, the images and the actual work are protected in a way that, actually during the installation, they were not. Originally installed, they had been glued to the wall, to the cement, and then there was molding that had been tacked up around the edges of the canvas. In 1975, the canvas was removed from the walls, and the paintings were actually sent off to a conservator in New York, and they were cleaned. And all of the glue that was used in 1914, which was rabbit skin glue, was cleaned off the back of the paintings. The paintings were then re-adhered to a canvas and put on stretcher bars. All of the large paintings were put on expandable stretcher bars, and so in 1975 they were reinstalled in the rotunda, and the original molding that was on each painting was installed on the painting. So it wasn't until this year that really the paintings have stepped up a quality in the experience, and also moving them around a little bit, juggling them a little bit, has provided further protection for the paintings. As we look at the paintings, they show a lot of stories about the change in this place and the culture, and they continue to remind us of that there's change ahead. One of the things that happened in 1975, when the paintings were removed from the wall, there were two paintings that were found behind two of the paintings that we see here. In 1975, these two paintings during the restoration were discovered as kind of a padding. And so when the conservation was done in 1975, these two canvases were also cleaned and placed on stretcher bars. These two paintings are not signed, and the conservator that restored these paintings and cleaned all of the Paxson murals that are in the rotunda speculated that these two were also Edgar Paxson paintings. During a later appraisal, some 7 or 8 years later, the appraiser suggested, because there was no signature, because the palette was so different, that these were not Edgar Paxson paintings. So there's some controversy out there. They are unsigned. I'm just thrilled that the commissioners and this is part of our history, our local art history. So discovering something like this is recapturing a time in 1914 where Edgar Paxson put both of these paintings under the other paintings to provide a stable surface for the murals that were in the rotunda. I also think that these are Edgar Paxson paintings, and the reason I think that is because when Edgar Paxson lived in Phillipsburg and was doing stage sets, and some of the stage sets that actually exist to this day in Phillipsburg have a lot of the same palette that these two paintings have as well. So they might have been an underpainting or a stage set painting, and he used this canvas as a utility to support the existing murals in the rotunda. Another reason that I believe these are Paxson's is the conservator in 1975 said that the paint that was on this canvas and the canvas itself matched the canvas and the murals in the rotunda. So I think the evidence is pretty strong that they're Paxson's, probably that he considered unfinished, and that's the way I look at them. I applaud the county commissioners and Paul Filicetti, who had the vision and believed in showing these, and I hope that there's some interpretive text or interpretive support materials so that when you tour the courthouse, that it draws attention to some of these concerns and some of these thoughts and ideas and speculations.